We all know someone who thinks they're a know-it-all, but nobody knows everything about everything. If they did, there wouldn't be so many mysteries in the world. Some of those mysteries have been around for thousands of years, and even the world's greatest historians, archaeologists, and scientists can't solve them. We've got plenty of mysteries just like that for you in this video. We don't know as much as we'd like to know about the ancient Aztecs, who once ruled vast swaths of South America, including almost all of what's now Mexico. Part of the reason we lack knowledge about them is that so much of their history was destroyed when they were brutally subjugated by the invading Spanish, leaving us without vital information that might otherwise have explained the full meaning of this three-faced clay mask. Without that knowledge, we can't even be 100% sure that the mask is Aztec at all. It's just as possible that it was created by the Teotihuacan culture, which came before the Aztecs. Although most of the paint that once adorned the surface of the mask has long since faded away, there's enough of it left for us to be able to tell that the central face was red, the second face was yellow, and the face that bookends the other two was white. This probably had a symbolic meaning. Perhaps the red represented youth, the yellow represented middle age, and the white represented death. That's only an educated guess, though. We'll never know for sure. Speaking of unusual heads and headgear, check out these Senufo Wambele funeral masks, which come from the Ivory Coast. They're complex artifacts to look at, and they're laced with symbolism. Mourners at Senufo funerals have worn these Janus-headed masks at funerals for hundreds of years. A traditional Wambele funeral mask contains aspects of multiple animals, including warthog tusks, crocodile teeth, clusters of quills from porcupines, and feathers from various birds. The idea behind wearing them at funerals is that they chase away any spirits that might be lingering at the funeral with the intention to follow the mourners home and bring harm to their villages. Nobody, not even the modern Senufo people, know for sure how and when this practice began, or who decided which animals had to be represented on the masks. The history of the Senufo people is largely passed down from one generation to the next orally, and the problem with oral traditions is that details go missing over time, like a very long game of Chinese whispers. Once information has been lost, it's very difficult to get it back. Midwifery has existed for almost as long as humanity itself, but the knowledge applied and the tools used in midwifery have changed drastically as the years have gone by. If you were a trainee midwife during the 18th century, you might have used something like Madame Coudray's mannequin as a learning aid. It's a crude doll of a baby emerging from a womb, made of fabric, and created by Angélique Marguerite Le Boussier de Coudray to help her teach the art of midwifery to women who lived in villages in rural France. She lived during a time when male doctors were trying to make it illegal for women to act as midwives because they didn't believe it was possible for them to have the relevant knowledge. She was instrumental in winning that argument, and in 1759 was appointed by none other than King Louis XV to teach midwifery to peasant women in the hope that infant mortality in the rural regions could be reduced. We have no way of measuring how successful she might have been in that role, but the tools she used were certainly imaginative. Did an alien spacecraft crash on the Norwegian island of Spitsbergen in 1952? Common sense says no, but let's look at the evidence. The story comes from a Norwegian newspaper called Saarbrücken Zeitung, which in June 1952 said that the Norwegian Air Force was investigating tales of unexplained radio interference in the area. When the Air Force arrived on the island, they found a disc-shaped craft made of bluish-white metal and measuring around 120 feet in diameter, badly broken and half buried in the ground. The report says that the Air Force officers saw strange writing around the edges of the craft and initially thought it was Russian. but were later told that the language was unknown. Nevertheless, the official explanation of the incident was that the Norwegians had found an experimental Russian aircraft that had crashed on a test flight. There's no evidence that the Russians ever worked on a disc-shaped craft in the 1950s, and the fact that the wreckage was taken away from the site, never to be seen again, only serves to make people more suspicious. Newspaper writers enjoy creating funny headlines, so they had a field day with our next recent discovery. When a farmer found enormous armadillo shells on his land in Buenos Aires, Argentina in February 2020, some of the first experts to arrive at the scene told the press that the shells were about the same size as a Volkswagen Beetle. That was enough for the media to nickname them Carmadillos. We have to admit that it's a good pun. It isn't strictly accurate to call the owners of these vast shells armadillos, though. They're actually glyptodons, an ancient and much larger ancestor of the armadillo that lived in this part of the world approximately 20,000 years ago and is extinct today. It's rare to find physical evidence of their existence, but these Argentinian examples have survived the passing of the years so well because they became deeply embedded in a muddy riverbed. Now they've been found, though, they might not last much longer. They're dangerously exposed to the elements, so paleontologists decided to extract the 1-ton shells and move them to somewhere they could be safely studied. For all our 21st century advances in medical technology, we still haven't come up with a functioning prosthetic eye device. All we can do if someone loses an eye is give them a ball to fill the socket with, which is exactly the same thing we did 5,000 years ago. Here's the proof. It's a prosthetic eye in the skull of a human skeleton that was found close to Zabal in Iran. The fake eyeball in its socket is made from a fairly disgusting-sounding mixture of animal fat and tar, which was then painted gold. It's comfortably the oldest prosthetic eye ever discovered. It's unlikely that any member of this ancient civilization could have gotten a prosthetic eye if they wanted one. In this case, the recipient was a 6-foot-tall woman who's thought to have been a high priestess. She was probably between 25 and 30 years old when she passed away. The ancient surgeon who installed the prosthetic had a surprisingly good grasp of the eye's anatomy, right down to using golden wires to simulate blood vessels. The ancient Egyptians also created prosthetic eyes, but this one is older than the oldest known Egyptian equivalent by at least 1,000 years. If we asked you to think of a data storage device, you'd probably think of either a hard drive or cloud storage through the internet on a remote server. If we'd asked you the same question 20 years ago, you'd likely have thought of CD or DVD storage. You might even have thought of floppy disks if you're a little old school. 5,500 years ago, though, data storage wasn't digital. If scientists are to be believed, important data was recorded and stored in code on clay spheres. The spheres have been found in what's now Iran, but would have been Mesopotamia when they were created, and what's encoded on them predates the invention of writing by approximately 2 centuries. Each sphere is hollow and contains various different geometric shapes. They're enigmatic and often come decorated with animal carvings, but experts believe that they may have been the first attempt by the human race to permanently store data. For example, sales receipts for the purchase of animals or goods. Only around 150 of them have been found so far, but the more we find, the better an understanding of them we'll gain. Humans have always been vain, and have always had concerns about looking their best. That's why the beauty and cosmetics industries are worth countless billions of dollars. There's nothing new about what they do, though. In fact, here's an ancient Roman take on the idea of face cream. It still has the finger imprint of the last person to use it some 2,000 years ago. The small tin was found in the ruins of an ancient Roman temple in London, England. Because of the religious nature of the building it was found in, it was briefly assumed to be a religious artifact of some kind, but an analysis of its contents revealed it to be made of animal fat, starch, and tin for pigmentation. That's similar to a face cream recipe known to have been used in the Italy of the time, so it's fair to assume its purpose was the same. While tin might sound like an unlikely ingredient for face cream, the use of tin here is actually better for the skin than the creams people were using in Rome at the time, where lead was used instead. Just before Mount Vesuvius erupted in the Roman city of Pompeii in the year 79, a baker finished baking a beautiful loaf of bread. He carefully split it into 8 pieces and was so proud of it that he even stamped his name on it. We know that because, amazingly, the loaf survived the volcanic eruption that engulfed and entombed Pompeii and still exists today. Thanks to the bread's excellent state of preservation, it's even still possible to read the baker's signature. It says, "Property of seller, slave of Q, Granius Verus." Through scientific analysis of the loaf, experts have been able to determine that it's made from sourdough, yeast, gluten, salt, water, spelt flour, and wholemeal flour. In other words, the bread was made using a recipe that's still followed by thousands of bakers all over the world today. There were more than 300 specialist pastry chefs in Rome alone by the start of the 1st century. So baking is clearly an art and tradition that was taken very seriously in the ancient Roman world. If you're a seasoned internet user, you'll recall the famous photo of Kim Kardashian's rear from 2014, which, quote-unquote, broke the internet. It was a remarkable sight, but it was also rather old. In fact, it appears that the world's most renowned reality television personality was imitating the stance of a 23,000-year-old Russian Venus statue. The 2-inch-tall Big Booty Venus was discovered in Siberia in April of 2017. It's made from a single tusk from a woolly mammoth. According to Dr. Konstantin Gavrilov, who oversaw the archaeological dig that unearthed the tiny figurine, the figure's appearance is more like Danae, a Greek mythological character. However, we believe that the Kim Kardashian analogy will stick with the majority of those who see it. Because the ancient inhabitants of Siberia had no idea who Kim Kardashian was, which is something that most of us would probably envy them for, the likely explanation for the existence of the amply proportioned statue is that it was a fertility doll and would have been given to women who were either pregnant or attempting to become pregnant. The Swiss Army knife is every adventurer's friend. If you're heading out into the great outdoors for a little wild camping, you'd be foolish not to take one with you. Should we really credit the Swiss for the invention of the ubiquitous multi-tool, though? Possibly not. This Roman answer to the Swiss Army knife was found during archaeological excavations on the Mediterranean coast in 2019. It was made during the 3rd century and came complete with a toothpick, a spatula, a fork, a spoon, and a knife. Based on that, it was probably used to prepare and then eat meals. The knife is silver, which suggests that the tool belonged to someone important. In fact, given that we've only ever found one such device, the person who owned it might also have been the person who invented it. We'll never know whether that was the case, but what we do know is that the Swiss Army knife wasn't invented until 1,500 years after this anonymous Roman inventor made their pocket meal kit. Why didn't the idea catch on at the time? We wish we knew. If you've ever wondered what Roman aristocrats did to pass the time between drinking wine and hosting parties, wonder no longer. Apparently, they were playing games using dice towers like this one, which was discovered almost exactly in between the villages of Freudsheim and Fettweiss in Germany in 1985. Based on the inscriptions on its surface, it may even have been a birthday gift. The text on one side celebrates a presumably recent military victory over the Picts, and the other side conveys good wishes to the gift's recipient. To be precise, it says, "Use this and live luckily," which is fairly blunt as goodwill messages go. Perhaps the Romans weren't big on sentiment. It's a remarkably complicated structure given its trivial use. Dice would be dropped in at the top and plunged through 3 levels before emerging down the steps at the bottom, ringing bells on their way out. While we understand what it does, we don't have any information about the type of game it was used to play. The Romans definitely weren't sitting around tables playing Monopoly, so what was this cute dice thrower used for? Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!